From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, we'll hear from K-State's Brian Coffey about his recent study of trends in live cattle negotiated prices over the past 15 years or so, and how prices in one region on any given day might influence prices in other major cattle feeding regions. Also, the featured speaker at the 2017 K-State Symposium on Cooperative Issues yesterday from CoBank, Tom Halverson, will address numerous current economic and policy issues facing agriculture and rural areas and talks about the dialogue he's been having with elected officials and administrative leaders on those matters. And later on, with Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven, right here on Agriculture Today.
Man, it's hot out here. Heat stress affects more than just humans. It also affects livestock. Extreme heat, humidity, wind speeds, and cloud cover all make a difference in air temperature. To control problems, make sure your livestock have shade and water provided at all times. This will help prevent problems in breeding, meat production, and reduce chances of death. Please take all these into consideration for livestock production. Brought to you by K-State Animal Science Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Once more, we want to tap into information that will be discussed in detail at the Risk and Profit Conference here at Kansas State, hosted by Agricultural Economics at the university. That'll start tomorrow, run through Friday. We've often had a chance to talk about price discovery in the beef cattle sector, and here's one more perspective that's been researched by our guest. He'll be sharing this at Risk and Profit. Brian Coffey is an agricultural economist at K-State. What you've been looking at, you say, Brian, are the negotiated live cattle markets. Explain the genesis of your work, if you would.
Okay, well, let's start with price discovery. It's a term, like you said, we've talked about a lot, and economists use it a lot. And what we mean by that is the way that markets will set a price. And so it doesn't matter if it's a good or a service. You have some people out there who are potential sellers of that, and so they will make offers that they're willing to sell that at a certain price, and that's the point that they're willing to. They don't have to actually sell. And then you've got people on the other side that are willing to buy. And so when those people come together with bids and offers, and eventually they will settle on a price and trade. And so that work that goes on, that back and forth, that's what we mean by price discovery. And just like, in the live cattle market, that's what we see every week, right? We've got offers out there, and we've got bids, and sometimes cattle trade, and sometimes they don't. And so between the potential sellers and potential buyers, the back and forth work goes on, and eventually you settle on a price and cattle move. So that's the price discovery process, and primarily happening in what we call the 5 major reporting regions. And so those are geographically different, kind of referred to as Colorado, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Texas. And so looking at those, what we're asking is, as the price discovery process happens, how does the work that's going on in one of those regions affect the work that's going on in another? Mm-hmm. All right, so just to throw out an example, are the prices in Nebraska affected by the prices that have been settled on in Kansas? That's kind of where we're going.
In effect, you're looking at where the price leaders might be within that collection regions, right?
That's right. That's one question to ask. When people bid in a certain week, they have to get their bids from somewhere. Or if they're going to offer, they have to get those numbers from somewhere. And a lot of times it's from prices that have been discovered in the past. And so like you say there, it can be the case that one region might lead another in that past prices would inform current prices.
But it's probably more complicated than that.
It's always more complicated. That's right.
So you've studied that relationship over multiple years' time using data available from the past. And after what we call mandatory price reporting was instituted quite a few years back now, you say.
That's right. So in 2001, the mandatory price reporting was instituted. And for our research now, we're just focusing on the world after mandatory price reporting because that's where we are now. One of the things that has brought a lot of concern is that if you look at live cattle prices since 2001, and it doesn't really matter which of those 5 regions you choose, there has been a shift. There's been a much higher level of prices and in some cases higher volatility of prices. We'd like to say, understand as economists if we could say what's driving that or, on the other hand, what that might lead to. Yeah, so that's another motivation of the work.
Well, right to it, the mechanics of your study here, how you got at this question of the interrelationship between regions and the negotiated price for live cattle.
Yeah, so basically looking at that time period, like we said, 01 up to 2017, if you just kind of look at the prices around 2009, 2010, is where we saw quite a big upward trend in live cattle prices and then also some increase in the relative volatility. So we split the data. We went from 2001 up to the end of 2009, so we call that period 1, and in period 2, first of 2010 up to the summer of 2017. So we updated these data just last month, so we're up to July 17. And so basically we tried to look at 2 questions. One was, how do past prices influence current prices? So as just an example, do prices 1 week or 2 weeks ago in Iowa influence the current price that's being discovered in Texas? And we're talking about weekly data here. So we're talking about a weekly price. And so that was the first question we asked. And so we did that for both of the time periods. And what we found was that there was some change there. It seems that in the earlier time period, the markets that were more the leaders were Kansas, and then to a lesser degree, Texas and Nebraska. Mm-hmm. As we've gone into this newer period with some higher level prices and a little bit higher, like I said, volatility, those markets don't seem to be leading. It seems to be more the burden is borne by Colorado. Colorado has been relatively constant, not a big change up or down. Texas, on the other hand, we've seen really decline we're just talking about the negotiated market, so their negotiated market has thinned out. Iowa has grown, Nebraska has grown relative.
You say you asked another question within the study as well.
That's right. So we could also say that if we know the past price of something, it helps us predict the current or future price of something else. And when we do that, the results are a little bit different. We see that from the earlier time period versus the later time period, there are fewer direct relationships between the markets. So in just a quick summary, in the early time period, we had 4 kind of distinct ways we could say, for example, that Kansas influenced Nebraska. So the information flowed from Kansas toward Nebraska. In the later time period, we can't say that. The 2 are still connected, but it's not clear which is informing the other. And so it's interesting that we do have a few, in this more volatile time period, the connections between the markets are not quite as distinct.
Is that indicative of a shift in the dynamics of the industry as far as, say, feeding cattle, for instance, where we see geographical changes over time?
That would certainly be one thing. We're not, to the point with this that we could, comfortably say what's causing that. But, the way that prices are set, the way that bids are made, how near you are to packing plants and that sort of thing. That could definitely play into it.
Where do you hope to go with these conclusions to date? There's a lot going on here, frankly, Brian.
There's a lot going on. There really is. And so basically the goal is just to get kind of an updated accurate picture of how the price discovery is happening. As people are bidding, what information, if we could tease out from the data, what information sources are informing those bids and offers. So as we go forward, just understanding that so that we could understand that if something happens to change one of these markets, whether it would be regulation, whether it would be just something changing in the environment, what we could expect to happen to the other markets, because they're so interconnected, and we want to know, kind of be able to think that through before things change. And on the other hand, also just as a help in terms of price forecasting and understanding live cattle prices, if we know, which one of these markets seem to be the important sources of price discovery information, we might be able to help people more accurately forecast and think about what prices are coming down the road.
Well, you have set a good baseline in that respect with this research, and you'll be sharing the full findings at Risk and Profit later on this week, and you're welcoming interaction with participants and attendees there as to what's going on out there.
That's right, and I would add that's pretty important here, that this research that we're doing is at this point preliminary, and that's one of the reasons we want to get it out at Risk and Profit. And so we can explain, all right, this is what our statistical models are telling us, and what we'd like at Risk and Profit, and frankly beyond that, is people in the industry who are actually out there, buying and selling cattle, to tell us, does this make sense? Why it makes sense, or some things that we might be missing. So we're really hoping for that kind of critical feedback and comments at Risk and Profit.
Very good. Looking forward to the presentation and seeing what kind of feedback is generated from this, Brian. Hey, thanks for summarizing it with us right here.
All right, thanks.
He's Brian Coffey, agricultural economist at K-State. And once again, this is a study of price discovery in the cattle industry and comparing the regions in the main cattle trading areas and how live negotiated prices are constructed within that system and some of the things that are driving those negotiated prices. Brian teamed up with fellow livestock economists Dustin Pendle and Glenn Tonzer of K-State on this project. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll return in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. For you now, comments on the state of agriculture and rural America, expressed by the keynote speaker at the 2017 K-State Symposium on Cooperative Issues, which took place here in Manhattan yesterday. The audience of agricultural cooperative officials and other ag professionals heard from the Chief Executive Officer of CoBank, the national cooperative bank based in Denver as part of the Farm Credit System, serving rural interests across the country. Yours truly had the pleasure of conducting this session with Tom Halverson as he addressed an assortment of topics. He cited a recent analysis that CoBank economists put together entitled The Rural-Urban Divide, which Tom says captures a number of the current issues facing agriculture and the rural sector in general.
Well, it's an interesting booklet, and we're sharing that with a lot of customers. In fact, I had the opportunity to testify in Congress at the House Agriculture Committee 2 times earlier this year, and at the last one, we gave a copy of that document to all the members of the committee. And I told them what I'll tell you, which is, wow, it seems awfully difficult to get good data to measure the kinds of things that are in that booklet to demonstrate what fill in the blank, growth conditions, labor market conditions, penetration of broadband internet, you name it, in rural America. We measure lots of stuff at a state level, or we measure it at a national level, or we measure it for an industry or whatever, but it's hard to get subset cuts to understand what's going on in urban versus rural. which is really important to us because, our customers are all in rural America. But what our economists were able to find, that we've published in there, is a variety of different kind of indicators that measure things that are relevant to our customer owners and demonstrate, the state of affairs at a point in time on a number of indicators. And the fact of the matter is, I think it's not a surprise that, the cash flow in the ag space 3 or 4 years ago was much higher, 50% plus higher than it is today. That has a big knock-on deflationary impact on rural America, particularly in places where agriculture is a substantial part of economic activity. That has a knock-on impact on other industries and so forth. And so what we see where rural America and agriculture in particular played a big part in helping drag the economy out of the post-financial crisis period, in the period 2010 to 2013 and 14. Now that's the other way around. Now the economy is growing slower than we'd like, but not bad, 1.5% to 2.5%. But rural America is countercyclical to that, right? And on almost any indicator that we put in that document, you can see that there's a differential, and the differential in many cases is widening. And that's an unfortunate set of facts and circumstances because, rural America really, really punches above its weight in terms of what it contributes to the country as a whole.
Since, as you stated, rural America lifted the economy out of its doldrums in the late 2000s, who's going to save rural America's bacon? To put it that way, very simplistically.
That's a good question. And no single person, no single institution, no single industry, can turn around that situation. It's going to be, as always, a combination of different things. So one of the things we talked about at the congressional testimony, the hearing that I mentioned, I have spoken to a lot of people in Washington, D.C. about the fact that, and this isn't a nonpartisan comment, I don't really care what political party you're in, I do care tremendously about rural America in general, agriculture in particular. Agriculture is really going through a difficult period. Let's not get ourselves into a trade war where some of our biggest customers turn around and jam us with a hot poker over agricultural products because we get in a dispute over manufactured goods. Because the agricultural economy is not really in a robust position to withstand some kind of nasty behavior from Mexico or China or fill in the blank. We have an outstanding long-term opportunity in agriculture over the next 20 years, but we got to make sure from a public policy perspective we do no harm to that opportunity set by picking fights that end up damaging our current access to markets that are so important to us, or reducing our access to future growth markets, because the vast majority of the incremental demand for the products that we grow and produce in the United States, that's represented by the 2 billion more people that will be on this planet in 20 years' time, is not in the United States, right? It's in Southeast Asia, India, China, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to be really thinking long-term about how we're going to continue the dramatic productivity and output we've had, 50% in my lifetime. But if we're going to continue to produce more and more and more and more, we have to be able to access the places where we're going to sell it. Because right now we're already selling between 25 and 30% of all of our agricultural product outside of the United States. That number's got to grow, because with a population growth that's at least positive, but not very positive. We're not going to sell all the incremental stuff we can produce here in our lifetime only in the United States. We're going to have to sell it in a whole bunch of other places. So I'm particularly focused on making sure that people don't inadvertently get us into a situation where our current and future opportunity set to export U.S. agricultural product is harmed.
Let's go down the path of ag policy outside of trade briefly, if we might. Negotiations and discussions are already underway in a very preliminary sense on the 2018 Farm Bill. There's hopes, in fact, here and there that might be done by the end of this calendar year. What are your thoughts on things again, outside of trade, that are highly important in those deliberations on the shape and structure of that new farm bill and farm policy in general?
Well, that's a great question. I have had an opportunity to see the chairman of the House and Senate Agriculture Committees in the last couple of months, as well as a number of other members of the House and Senate on the committees, and talked about this extensively. The evidence, at least as demonstrated by the public statements of those individuals and by the fact that the committees themselves have been on a listening tour all over the United States, extensively in recent weeks and months. The fact that Secretary of Agriculture Perdue just spent a week on the road in a camper van traveling all over middle America talking to people, doing a listening tour. I have to believe, and I do believe, that what they're all hearing is we've got to have a farm bill, and it must include the usual items, crop insurance, risk mitigation products, and the like. And there isn't any disagreement about that. Whether I spoke to Republicans or Democrats, they're all like, yeah, we get it. We'd like to get a good crack at it this year if at all possible. They're working the order as we speak. They're not procrastinating. They're not seeing the farm bill preparation wrapped around the axle of all the other things that have hamstrung the United States Congress these days. That's all very encouraging. What's discouraging, of course, is a couple things, one of which is the fiscal situation of the United States government is so dire that everybody knows and understands that there'll be fewer dollars, even if you do get a bill, because everything is being compressed because the fiscal situation is so dire. The challenge we have, and we in the farm credit system as advocates, for our customer owners and production agriculture people all over the country, and I know people in this room and your own institutions and do the same thing. We have to be relentless advocates for good policy, including the Farm Bill, and to make sure that our voices are heard in that regard. That includes particularly, and there's a lot of it in the pamphlet that's in your folder there, related to infrastructure, because as many of you know, in addition to all of its agriculture-related policies, USDA is a substantial presence in the rural infrastructure business, financing generation, transmission, distribution, electric co-ops all over the country, water systems, and other things. Those are activities in areas where CoBank has a very significant activity. If the country puts in a big effort to mobilize resources and capital for investing in our infrastructure, which demonstrably is necessary, let's make sure that doesn't all go to urban America, but some appropriate component of it goes to rural America, where we have the pressing needs, whether it be insufficient broadband infrastructure that's necessary for life and business in rural America, even more so these days because modern agriculture without wireless communication technology just doesn't work anymore. And we would be delighted to partner with the Department of Agriculture and others to help facilitate a meaningful increase in infrastructure investing in the country, because if that were spread around in the right way at the right critical nodes and places in the right parts of the infrastructure complex, it could do a lot of good for the country in general, but for rural America in particular.
Remarks there from the Chief Executive Officer of CoBank, Tom Halverson, the featured guest at the K-State Symposium on Cooperative Issues, yesterday here in Manhattan. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and moving on now to today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, statements made by Canadian Trade Minister Chrystia Freeland that Canada would protect its dairy programs in the upcoming NAFTA negotiations are being met with criticism by U.S. dairy producers. Quoting here the National Milk Producers Federation President and CEO Jim Mulhern, for too long, Canada has relied on government controls on farm milk production to boost prices while minimizing dairy imports to limit competition. Mulhern went on to say, by comparison, the U.S. has slashed its government involvement in dairy markets and relies on exporting its products to global customers to a greater degree than ever before, in Mulhern's words. Now, as for the assertion by Freeland that trade is weighed toward the U.S. in dairy, Mulhern said that much of what the U.S. exports to Canada is ultimately shipped back under Canadian import for re-export programs. Canada, he says, has been refusing to share details of imports and exports under those programs, but he says the reality is much of the dairy the U.S. ships to Canada doesn't stay in Canada. With the negotiations set to begin today, the National Pork Producers Council repeated its request that a modernized NAFTA would maintain the zero tariff rate on pork traded in North America. The NPPC has been one of the leading agricultural voices in support of the agreement. It issued a white paper and twice testified before congressional committees on the benefits of the pact. The Canada and Mexico top markets for pork, so obviously, quoting here, we don't want any disruptions in our exports to those countries. We need to keep pork trade flowing. Those are the words of NPPC President Ken Mashoff, who's a pork producer from Illinois. Since NAFTA went into effect in 1994, U.S. trade north and south of the borders has more than tripled, growing more rapidly than U.S. trade with the rest of the world. Canada is the number 2 market for U.S. agricultural products now, Mexico number 3. Last year, America's producers exported more than $38 billion of products to the two nations, or 28% of all U.S. agricultural exports. And those generated more than $48 billion in additional economic activity, supporting nearly 280,000 U.S. agricultural jobs. For the U.S. pork industry in specific, Canada is the number 4 market. Mexico is number 2. Last year, the industry shipped almost $799 million worth of pork to Canada and nearly $1.4 billion to Mexico. Mashoff went on to say U.S. pork trade with Canada and Mexico has been very robust, and we need to maintain and even improve that trade. He says we will continue to work with the administration to make sure that happens in a modernized NAFTA. As discussions continue on the 2018 Farm Bill, one of the issues livestock groups are focusing on is the health of the nation's food animal population. Todd Domer tells us here that livestock organizations are encouraging Congress to enhance the U.S. response to a possible foot and mouth disease outbreak.
Recent foreign animal disease exercises in Kansas and other states have led animal health officials and livestock leaders to recognize the traditional herd depopulation response to foot and mouth disease would not be feasible. The replacement strategy of vaccination also has its flaws, as the current supply of FMD vaccine is inadequate for an outbreak of any significance. As proof, KLA participated in an exercise last fall led by the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Animal Health. In that scenario, foot and mouth disease was hypothetically confirmed at 1 feed yard and 2 dairies in the state. Kansas animal health officials determined about 1.5 million doses of vaccine would be needed from USDA. That represents the entire supply of vaccine expected to be available in the U.S. during the first week of any FMD outbreak. This has prompted the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Kansas Livestock Association, National Pork Producers Council, American Sheep Industry Association, National Milk Producers Federation, and others to request additional funding in the new Farm Bill to develop a more adequate FMD vaccine bank. While the U.S. has been FMD-free since 1929, an outbreak would have a devastating effect on all of agriculture. Congressional support for a robust FMD vaccine bank through the Farm Bill would help protect U.S. food security and overall national security. I'm Todd Domer.
And you're listening to Agriculture Today. Once more, this is a quite busy stretch for K-State sponsored field days for you crop and livestock producers. Want to tell you about a few more of these that are coming up right away, including one that's set for a week from today at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. It'll be the Row Crop Roundup Fall Field Day. Row crops, including the latest research into crop selection, tillage, pest management, will take center stage there. That field day starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. It'll begin with registration. Then the program itself at 9:30. There will be a complimentary lunch served. The field tours will include a look at occasional tillage in long-term no-till, management of sugarcane aphid in grain sorghum. Then the indoor presentations will include sorghum early planting, managing Palmer amaranth in corn and sorghum, crop selection considerations for West Central Kansas, sorghum versus corn versus soybean economic returns in a challenging market, and selection of wheat varieties, lessons learned from the 2017 harvest. That is the lineup for K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes and its Row Crop Roundup Fall Field Day. That is a week from today, August the 23rd. Registration at 9 o'clock. The program will start at 9:30 at the center just to the south of the city of Hayes off of U.S. Highway 183. Also next week, a week from tomorrow, August the 24th, K-State's Southwest Research and Extension Center will host its Fall Field Day. That'll get going about 8 o'clock with registration. The program itself at 9:15. It'll include field tours, seminars, and commercial exhibitor displays, plus a sponsored lunch. Some of the topics to be covered during the field tours and seminars: corn and sorghum insect control, a full update there, weed control in irrigated corn and dryland sorghum, the effect of humic products on sorghum yield and nitrogen use efficiency, integrating cover crops and annual forages into wheat, sorghum fallow cropping systems, wheat health management, and there will be a core hour for commercial pesticide license. Again, that's the lineup for K-State's Southwest Research and Extension Center Fall Field Day. That'll take place a week from tomorrow, August the 24th, at the center just to the east of Garden City. It'll start at 8 o'clock in the morning with registration. The program just after 9 o'clock. We hope you can take in one or both of these field days put on by K-State this coming week. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
The plan was that we would drive together up north to watch the eclipse.
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
They flew to Phoenix to attend a wedding. Next, they will fly to Kansas City, rent a car, and head our way to arrive on August 20th, one day before the great American eclipse. Their family from the Netherlands. It's quite a distance to come to observe and celebrate this great event, the total solar eclipse. It's the moon passing between sun and earth. The plan was that we would drive together up north to watch the eclipse, but some health issues stop us from going. Too bad. We will go next time. As it momentarily gets dark and darker during the eclipse, I wonder if the cicadas will start chirping, rasping their wings. Because we will not go up to Nebraska, I did some thinking. From what I've read and know, it amazes me how much we can predict, even the time of the day when darkness takes over as the shadow races across the USA. I'm only interested in southeast Nebraska and northeast Kansas. It will happen around 1:20 p.m. Then, whoosh, a silent whoosh, and it will be over, and slowly daylight will come back. We know. But what such an event had been for earlier people who did not know, the shaman or other seers must have been anxious when their people asked and were terribly frightened by the momentary event, the darkening of the earth. We know in the past there have been eclipses. I read that the next one will be in 2045. It will be a total solar eclipse covering the United States from North California to Florida. The predictability intrigues me. The people who study these phenomena know. By knowing, they can predict with certainty. I will have to listen to the stories while staying home. I don't have to fight the traffic snarls. Don't forget our roads, county roads, are mostly narrow. Not so easy to turn and reverse. However, I'm sure our Dutch family will manage. They have crisscrossed the USA camping and have lived here when young. They'll manage, and I will listen to their stories. Then later that evening, when the sun has set and the night sky with stars is overhead, I'll step out on our hill, and I will look up and see. It will be like I was there, and yet I will be home. And the next night it will be the same. A very good feeling. I will see familiar stars, and I will say to myself that I should learn more about our stars and galaxies. Yet, I seem to be satisfied just looking up from my hill and being awed. As I said earlier, we won't be joining the family because of some health issues. As things stand now, there will be an operation. If successful, it will make all the difference. We're still running tests. It's the if which keeps our minds turning. The eclipse is not an if. Oh yes, there may be clouds or heavy overcast, which will make the experience different. That is an if. But there is no if in regard to the eclipse happening. It's coming. If I know that the outcome of an operation would be with no ifs, not even a small percentage, I would have peace of mind. Now, we must trust in the capabilities and care of doctors and medical staff. You step into the eclipse, or better said, the eclipse rolls over you and there will be daylight again after so many minutes. We expect it. We know that it will be so. There is a difference here, knowing or even trusting. When John Glenn orbited the Earth, he trusted that all calibrations and equipment would bring him home. He trusted. He knew a lot, but surely didn't know it all. But he trusted, and that gave him the strength to smile as he walked to the capsule. The Great American Eclipse, as described in Times, July 17, is not the end of times. The sun will peek out from behind the night again. Birds will sing again, and cows will need to be milked on time. On our refrigerator is an ancient proverb. He who has faith has hope, and he who has hope has everything. I find these old proverbs and quotes interesting as I tend to take them apart. And he who has hope has everything? That baffles me. I get more strength out of trust. I trust you will do the very best you can, and based on that trust, I accept. A year ago, my son Ian took the John Deere tractor home, took it apart for repair. It would not run anymore. He started with the obvious, but as he found out, he had to get deeper and deeper into it and finally had to open up the engine. All pieces were laid out on the table and carefully examined. This past Saturday evening, he emailed me and attached a short video clip of the tractor, now put together, purring again. It sounded lovely, like a successful open-heart surgery. I trusted that he could do it. I had faith in him. The tractor has a new life. Think what that means. It's like the sun coming back from the eclipse. Tractors, though, feel no pain, no discomfort, and they don't worry. Tractors hold no memories. Yes, they do make memories, but as I said, they do not hold them. We do.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. Our time's away for today. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.